if we look at the classic literature in public administration, public management, that literature shows that socialization into organizational culture define what organizations do and how they do them. And in addition, in organizational psychology and also political science, we also know that socialization into organizational culture distinguish high-performing organizations from low-performing public organizations, including in Ghana. So, for instance, Erin McDonald did a study in Ghana highlighting that point. We also know that that the direct supervisor, or I'm not sure in certain West African country context, they're called OGAs. The bosses, immediate bosses, play a very important role in the socialization of newly recruited civil servants into their teams. And yet again, we don't really know how direct supervisors socialize these new recruits. We know they're important, but we don't know how they actually do that. A presumption in the literature is that given that we are public sector with other regarding values, organizational missions, the way to socialize new recruits into organization is to talk about these values and to talk about how important these missions are to them and impress upon them the importance of serving the public. So what I call values-based socialization. So talking about the importance of value. So that is a presumption, but we don't really have a lot of evidence on it. So in order to explore that, so I will first start talking about some of the headline, findings and overview of the research method before diving deeper into the research. So in order to explore that, what I do that is I conducted an exploratory sequential mixed method design. So that essentially is combining an inductive qualitative research with deductive quantitative research. So a little bit of theory building using grounded theory approach and 80 interviews with new recruits, their direct supervisor, HR representative across 9 public organizations in Ghana and Nigeria. And then I propose a theory of how recruits are socialized by their supervisor, and then go and test that theory in 2 original large N surveys with 371 new recruits in Ghana and Nigeria civil service. So that is an overview of research design. So we can talk more about it in details later. The headline findings is that contrary to the literature's presumption that socialization into organizational culture is done by talking about the importance of organizational values, what I find is that at least in Nigeria and Ghana civil service, the right supervisor rely more on assigning, guiding, and correcting around task in socializing recruits. So everything, the socialization is primarily around immediate task at hand rather than these organizational values, what I call task-based socialization. And in addition, this task-based socialization has important influence on recruits' work attitudes and their early career advancement. And I also find in contracts, the value-based socialization, that is directly talking about the importance of organizational value or public sector values to the recruits, don't matter to them alone, don't matter to them unless supervisors are also providing task-based socialization to these recruits. So that is the headline findings of the research. Now I will go into details of both phases of research. Now then, we'll start with the theory building. So in that phase, given that we don't really have a theory in the literature or a lot of direct evidence on how supervisors socialize recruits, so I started with a qualitative inductive approach. So I use a constructivist grounded theory approach recommended by Shamus and 80 individual in-person interviews conducted in Nigeria and Ghana across 9 public organizations. So at each public organization, what I did was I interviewed 4 new recruits, 4 direct supervisor, and 1 HR personnel who understand about human resource management of that organization. And the way that I chose my sampling strategy was purposes to maximize across cadre, grade, departments, and ministries in order to maximize the generalizability of the findings. So again, we can talk about the sampling strategy and involve organizations if we are interested in Q&A. So the first thing what I found is that when I started interviewing people, the fact that new recruits have on paper their schedules, what in Ghana context we call schedule or like job description, does not necessarily mean they have actual job assignment, role assignment, or someone is guiding and correcting them in a workplace. I find that, in many of the interviews, that seems to be the main topic that people want to talk about, the new recruits want to talk about. So there is I find the variation. Some recruits have, from the first day they enter their job, they were given a role to play in their team. And since then, they were given consistent test assignment, consistent feedback and correction from their direct supervisor. In contrast, other recruits were never consistently given a role to play in their organization, nor someone was actively teaching them about what to do, about their job. And to show that in terms of interview findings, so this is an excerpt from one of the interviews with one of the recruit. In this interview, the recruit was sat down on her first day at her organization, and her direct supervisor had a chat with the recruit on the first day. It's sort of like an interview, asking the recruit about what her interests are, what her like career aspiration are. And then at the end of the interview, the supervisor said, "Great, you're going to work as a computer typist for my unit." And then since then, the supervisor has given her consistent test assignment, guidance, and feedback. So this is a case of positive test-based socialization this recruit was experiencing, so to speak. In contrast, this is an excerpt from another interview in which this recruit allegedly said that she sees many recruits in the organization, in the public sector, and many of her fellow recruits are not really into their jobs, she said. And this is because their direct supervisors are not really assigning them job, does not really giving them guidance and correction in their job. So we can see across the interview this kind of different task-based socialization experience individuals are experiencing. So the question to ask is then, do these different socialization experience that people are reporting, the new recruits are reporting, do they matter? In interviews, what I found out is that they seem to matter for recruits' identities, their work attitudes, their early career advancement, and of course, their acculturation into their organizations. To show that this is an excerpt from an interview with another recruit in which this recruit was assigned a role of memo writing in very early on when he joined his organization. And what that enabled him to do is to master memo writing and then also signal to his supervisor and other superior his potential. So by the time we sat down and had a conversation 1 year later, as you can see in the excerpt, the recruit was given multiple roles to play in his organization. So it's a sign of his career progression. In contrast, in interviews, what I find is that recruits who are not given positive task-based socialization, they feel marginalized, they feel unhappy. Many of them are thinking about quitting the civil service. And many of them don't feel committed to the civil service. And they also feel what they say stagnant, that is, their career don't progress. So based on that 80 interviews findings, which I'm showing in this stylized patterns, a few quotes, I propose task-based socialization, which is not talked about in the literature. So in this theory, at least in Ghana and Nigeria, the primary socialization on new recruits is done by supervisor assigning them tasks, and giving them guidance and correction. And that behavior, that task-based socialization practice by supervisor, first and foremost influence recruits' learning. And then through learning, new recruits' identity, work attitudes, performance, early career advancement, and acculturation into organizational norms. And so I propose 3 hypotheses that I then go on and test in theory testing phase, which we will talk about shortly. So the hypothesis 1 is drawing on the interviews. I propose that at least in Ghana and Nigeria context, the right supervisor rely more on task-based socialization of recruits rather than value-based socialization into the civil service. And hypothesis 2 said, actually, the task-based socialization is positively related with new recruits' job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and early career advancement. And hypothesis 3 is drawing upon the literature. I also suggest, well, although we don't really see that in Ghana and Nigeria context, value-based socialization, given the literature, is also positively associated with new recruits' job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and early career advancement. So I propose these 3 hypotheses and go on and test them in a much larger pool of civil servants, which is the theory testing phase. So to do that, what I did was I used 2 original large N surveys, primarily constructed for this theory testing phase, in order to measure how the task-based and value-based socialization practice by direct supervisor. I used 2 types of observational measure. So one type of observational measure, ADAPT, is highly influential methodology for measuring managerial practices from organizational economics. And then the second type of observational measure is essentially absolute measure, which is essentially asking recruits to report the frequency of task-based and value-based socialization behavior from their direct supervisor that they experience in their first year. So 2 types of measure. And today I will primarily talk about absolute measure because they are much easier to interpret, but the results are very similar. I also included a vignette experiment, which we will talk more about it in the survey. And I rolled that out survey to 371 new recruits into Nigeria and Ghana civil service. In Ghana, the new recruits, the respondents come from across the entire civil service. In Nigeria, the respondents came from 4 federal organizations in Nigeria. And the findings then, so very much like interview finding, the first thing is I want to demonstrate the variation that the recruits are reportedly experiencing in task-based and value-based socialization by their supervisor. So when I ask recruits how frequently they get task assignments from their supervisor in a typical month in their first year, about 1 out of 2 recruits reported that they have work to do from their supervisor every week of the month in their first year. But about a third of the recruits said they have work to do for 2 weeks and less than 2 weeks of the month. So you can see some recruits have routine assignments and some recruits don't. When it comes to guidance and correction, you can also see variation. When I ask the recruits how consistently their supervisor guide them, give them guidance and feedback in their first year, about a quarter of the recruits said for every task, their supervisor give them guidance and feedback. But on the other hand of the spectrum, 1 out of 10 recruits never received, according to them, guidance and feedback from their supervisor. So this is about 2 dimensions of task-based socialization variation. I also asked them about whether they're experiencing values-based socialization. So when I ask the recruits how often their supervisor discuss about the importance of organizational values, organizational mission, public sector values to them in their first year, reportedly about 1 out of 3 supervisors talk about these importance of these values every month to the recruits. But on the other hand, about 1 out of 4 supervisors never talk about public sector values to recruits. the value-based socialization variation here. And just like the interview finding, where just like the interview finding, I did a t-test for the mean difference in score between task-based and value-based socialization to see which is the more prevalent form of socialization that the recruits are reportedly experiencing. And you can see here, especially the last row, the mean score for task-based socialization is significantly higher than the mean score for values-based socialization, essentially suggesting that just collaborating interview finding, indeed, supervisors are relying more on task-based socialization of recruits rather than value-based socialization. Again, now that is just a variation. Now we have to see, do they matter to recruits? Do they matter to organizational performance that we are interested in for the public sector? So I ran correlational regression, and this is just correlational regression specification. We can talk about it later. So as you can see here, so I'm showing here in this graph two different types of measure for task-based and value-based socialization that the recruits reportedly experienced in their first year, and then their current level of job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and etc. later on. So as you can see, task-based socialization is positively related with their current level of job satisfaction, organizational commitment, how many days they are spent on their assignment in the previous month, which is a proxy for how involved they are in their office, the number of role assignments in their current unit, which is a proxy for their career advancement, the number of assignments into their additional teams, another proxy for their career advancement. So the task-based socialization in their first year is positively related with all these outcomes, regardless of the measures we used. And in contrast, value-based socialization is not consistently related with these outcomes. And of course, many of you are aware, these are just correlational findings, and they don't mean causation. So in order to tease out the causal effects in these correlational findings, I also included a vignette experiment in the survey, which is essentially is a scenario, is a hypothetical scenario was presented to survey respondent, in which the scenario present about a new recruit, a hypothetical new recruit joining a hypothetical public organization and being assigned a hypothetical direct supervisor. And the vignette vary along only task-based and value-based socialization behavior by the supervisor. And it is a 2x2 cross-design vignette. And a single vignette was randomly assigned across respondent. So if a respondent was assigned treatment 1, they were shown a vignette experiment in which a hypothetical supervisor provide both task and value-based socialization to recruit. If they are assigned vignette 2, the treatment 2 assigned a hypothetical supervisor who only provide task-based socialization. Treatment 3, hypothetical supervisor who only provide value-based socialization, and then control where hypothetical supervisor don't provide either task-based or value-based socialization. And these vignettes are experimentally assigned across respondent in the survey. So that is the validity of causal inference. And this is just a causal identification strategy, which we can talk about later. And again, collaborating our correlational findings. I would like you to pay attention to this panel only, so you don't have to worry about the bottom panel. So being assigned a hypothetical supervisor who only provide task-based socialization is positively associated with higher reported level of job satisfaction and promotion odds, but not organizational commitment. In contrast, being assigned a hypothetical supervisor who only provide value-based socialization is not significantly related with any of these outcomes. Finally, interestingly, being assigned a hypothetical supervisor who provide both task and value-based socialization is associated with a higher level of job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and promotion odds than being assigned a hypothetical supervisor who only provide task-based socialization. So if you look across both interview findings and correlation of findings, and then finding from experimentally varied vignette experiment, what we find is that contrary to the literature's focus on derived values communication, at least in Nigeria and Ghana context, supervisors primarily socialize recruits by assigning, guiding, and correcting. And it is this task-based socialization that has important influence on recruits' work attitudes and early career advancement. In contrast, value-based socialization alone does not matter to recruits unless task-based socialization is also provided. I will conclude by very briefly discussing policy implication. What that means is, though, that the supervisor the role of the supervisor in socialization needs better recognition. And the role of the supervisor in socialization process of new recruits need to be facilitated. That is, for instance, supervisors need to understand the background information of recruits joining their team. So there should be a better coordination between HR department and then the supervisor. Supervisors also need to be empowered in their attempt to positively socialize new recruits through task socialization. So what that means is understanding how to give effective guidance, effective correction, and also meritocratic task assignment and meritocratic guidance and correction. And they also need to be rewarded. I mean, in Ghana civil service, so in Nigeria civil service, there is performance-based appraisal system, but the appraisal system does not recognize the amount of time that the supervisor sign and their effort in socializing new recruits. And equally, the recruits need empowerment in task-based socialization. Given that task-based socialization experience is important to them for their work attitudes and their early career advancement, they need, when they come to civil service training and orientation should not only focus on things like rules and regulations, do's and don'ts, but also how to negotiate for task assignment with their bosses, how to ask for constructive guidance and feedback. So both sides of the coins need to come together if the recruits are to be fully and positively integrated into the civil service. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hein. That was very, very interesting and actually new for us, because I think we've done a lot of different seminars, and most of the time we are not talking about organization, HR. We are more into specific areas. Like last 2 weeks, we had one on mining. So we do mining and other areas. So this is a new area for us, and we are very privileged that you would present that to us. So I think kindly would open the floor for questions for Dr. Hein. So participants, you can now go ahead and ask some questions. Kindly raise your hand, and if I mention your name, the administrator would unmute you, and then you can go ahead and ask your question. Thank you. Dr. Inusa, I see a hand up. Dr. Inusa Abdullah, who is a senior faculty member at the psychology department. Thank you, Doc, for joining us. Kindly go ahead and ask your question.
All right, thank you very much for the presentation. Very, very important, very interesting for us as industrial and organizational psychologists. Very interesting observations and findings. And I think this is a very detailed research that I just want to make some inquiries about whether the study considered getting different results if the sample had been taken entirely from Ghana as against entirely from Nigeria. Because when you mix these two countries, we know and understand the implications of national cultures and organizational cultures before even the general cultures that we are aware of. Do you think that would have given us different results? Because talking about socialization, value-based socialization and all that, it's possible maybe within the nation, what they see in terms of how they work and the interaction could influence the results. I think that's my first observation. The second one has got to do with the process of recruitment, the process of recruiting these participants to come and serve in the civil service for both Ghana and Nigeria. It may be different. And this possibly could influence the result in a way. And my last point is whether these organizations that the civil servants were taken from, whether they have the systems in place, the right systems in place. You can get to an organization and they don't have job descriptions for their employees. You can get to an organization, and of course, I'm happy you mentioned performance appraisal systems. But as to whether they are done the same way is something that I think could influence the results. So I'm just trying to find out whether these were considered in the process of the research. Apart from that, I think it was a very great research, very inspiring. Thank you very much.
Dr. Anusa, thank you very much for 3 brilliant questions. So in terms of the first question, obviously, I think sample size is a restriction when it comes to doing the subsample analysis between Ghana and Nigeria. I did, and the results are similar. But with that said, when you divide the sample size, and of course the standard errors are getting bigger, the survey result, at least given the sample that I have, don't suggest that there are differences in finding when you specifically look at, for instance, Ghana sample. I mean, Dr. Anusa's insights and intuitions are very correct. I was very interested in that too, so I just look at the Ghana subsample. So unfortunately, sample size did not reveal much, but in terms of qualitative interview, again, so that is not in terms of the numbers, in terms of the quality of the interviews. My impression is that in Ghana, there are many more supervisors. For instance, like when it comes to giving guidance, my impression is in Ghana, there are many more supervisors who do discussion-based feedback giving. So they would ask the recruit why they took a specific course of action and what they think about it. And then had a discussion and give suggestions about alternative course and see what the recruits think about it. And then like go back and forth type of discussion-based feedback giving. So I find that much more in Ghana. That's my impression in my qualitative interviews. In Nigeria, unfortunately, I find more cases of supervisor giving feedback in a way through frustration. So that is itself a reflection of potentially different culture. And so your first question, I think what we'll be very interested in is that to see and then to extend it beyond Nigeria and Ghana is that, well, in contrast to the literature, my study find that the supervisor focus on task-based task channel in socialization recruits, not values channel. And I think it'll be interesting to see in other contexts, other entirely different culture, whether when and where value-based socialization, talking about values, kick into play, and what are the contexts that makes value-based socialization more conducive versus task-based socialization. So I think that for me is an area of future research. In terms of the second question, very briefly, since I want to give other people a chance too, the recruitment strategy is that at every organization we construct a sampling frame. So we ask the organization of HR about a sampling frame for new recruits, and then we send out for every participating organization, and then we send out survey link to all of them in the sampling frame for each participating organization. But of course, I think who fill out the survey and who don't might be systematically different. I try to test it in terms of complete survey response versus incomplete survey response, and the results are robust. And the last one is, Dr. You're absolutely right. The one thing is that, and it should be of interest in itself, is that many recruits sometimes come into the organization without a job description, without a schedule, and it is extremely challenging to them. So that has a lot of practical, as you can imagine, consequences for new recruits. I hope I satisfy your questions. I hope we can come back so that I don't take away time from others as well.
Right. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm grateful.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yinsa. I see another hand up. James Ofori. James, you can go ahead with your question.
Okay. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentation. The success of any organization depends on the level of socialization between the supervisors and the recruits. I have realized that in my country, Ghana, we have a particular way of recruiting people. In some organizations, even people who are not qualified are recruited into organizations because they are affiliated to one or two political parties. And we also have supervisors who do not have a high level of human capital. What I mean is that the knowledge and the skills they need to ensure there is socialization between them and the recruits. So I just want to suggest that if the study can go further by looking at the competency or the human capital level of both supervisors and recruits. Thank you.
Thanks, James. I absolutely agree. That I think essentially your question is that. I think the question is why. I guess like why do some supervisor give positive socialization experience to some recruits and negative socialization experience to other recruits? And I think they are at least so. I absolutely agree with you. That is another important area for further investigation. Based on my interview, my suspicion is they are both meritocratic reasons and non-meritocratic reasons behind the supervisor behavior, and they both concerned with exactly what you were talking about. Sometimes you see non-meritocratic reasons. Sometimes supervisor will discriminate for lack of better words, against a particular recruit for various reasons, and then give them a very negative socialization experience. Sometimes supervisor, on the other hand, will use meritocratic reasons. If a recruit is competent, if a recruit is hardworking, public-oriented, they will give the recruits better assignments, much more attention to and giving the guidance and correction. So I think the next area is absolutely understanding and explaining this behavior by direct supervisors. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Hein. I can't see another hand up at the moment. So I'd ask my audience again, are there any more questions? I saw a hand up, but the person has lowered it. Any more questions? Then I think I will ask my question. So, Dr. Hein, I'm very curious about the fact that you find more task-based socialization instead of value-based socialization. So then in your study, were you able to determine maybe the period over which recruits have worked at the organization? So does it mean that maybe task-based socialization starts in the initial stages, and then maybe as you are given some form of permanent. So were these recruits permanent workers? Were they temporary workers? Were they contract workers? Because maybe all of these things would give you varying results here.
Dr. Antoine, I think again another excellent suggestion. I did not so I think ideally this is a cross-sectional survey, unfortunately.
Okay.
Ideally, I would do a panel survey.
Okay.
But I can go back and have a look at the reported tenure length.
The
So like
reported
tenure length, and then divide the sample into different tenure groups and see and if we have enough power to see like younger recruits and older recruits report different types of. Yeah, it's excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, because I think that could also give us some interesting results, because sometimes some supervisors feel inwardly, I mean, it's not a generalization I want to make, but it could be that some supervisors feel that, well, I will not take too much time in teaching you so much. I'll just rather assign tasks to you until I'm very sure that you're going to be a permanent worker here. And then I'll I'll do more in giving you responsibilities, because then I know you can help build the institution. I think sometimes that also is a judgment call for some supervisors. Okay. I think Dr. Inuse's hand is up again. Doc, please go ahead and ask your question.
All right. Thank you very much. So I'm back again with an interest in whether you have observed any gender differences in what you did. Are there any factors that you could say maybe came in as a result of differences in gender? It's something that I want to find out. And also, is there any, or have you considered also the level of education? Because if someone comes in to work with a Bachelor of Arts degree, another person comes in to work with SHS, maybe because of experience the person has been employed. Are there any differences, or were these considered, or you did not look at them in this light? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dada. Not yet. I do have the data in terms of like being able to compare between male and female or different age group. I just haven't, in part because I was more interested in what is the overall picture that we can look at without going into different socio-demographic characteristic. The only thing I could say for now is based on the interviews. And in interviews, there is definitely a gender dimension. Sometimes the people say that the same gender. So if the gender of the supervisor and supervisee match, that's not good for the socialization experience of the recruits. I haven't tested yet, actually, in the survey, or sometimes in sometime during the interviews, some respondents suggested that if a recruit qualification is higher than their supervisor, it could be a challenging socialization experience for recruit as well. And again, I haven't tested, Doctor, but I will. These are fantastic suggestions.
Right.
Thank you, Dr. Hein. Thank you, Dr. Inusa. I can see Zagun, Abubakar Zagun has raised his hand. Zagun, please introduce yourself and ask your question.
Good afternoon. As you mentioned, my name is Abubakar Zagun Adams. I'm a first-year student at Social Policy, Center for Social Policy Studies. My question is, in your presentation, you mentioned one of the findings that came out was tax-based training or tax-based way of helping the employees. But I don't know whether you find out something about a value base and what are some of the revelation you had on a value base. Then again, with a sample size of 371, I want to find out how did you come by that? Is it that you put together all the population from Nigeria and Ghana, and then you came by it, or you focus only Ghana to come out with a sample size? Thank you.
Yeah, two very good questions, Zagun. The first one is that so if we look at especially the vignette experiment, which in terms of causal identification should be the most valid, is that you remember, let me go back to that point if I could. You remember that being assigned a hypothetical supervisor who provide only task-based socialization is associated with higher level of job satisfaction and promotion odds. In contrast, being assigned a hypothetical supervisor who provide only value-based socialization is not significantly related with these outcomes. But if a supervisor provide both, the level of job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and promotion odds are higher for recruits compared to those recruits who only have a supervisor who provide task-based socialization. So together, what that seems to suggest is that, at least in Nigeria and Ghana context, talking about how important it is to work for the organization. I think we all have heard about the story about, like working in NASA, for instance, the mission-driven culture, sending the first human to the moon, and how people identify with that mission. So what this finding suggests is that talking about this kind of importance of mission, being a forest ranger, importance of being a civil servant, serving the public, is not an important. It adds value, but it has to come together with also giving assignment, giving them feedback, giving them correction. It has to come with also practical side. And otherwise, the recruit don't really care. And then supervisor for now is primarily focusing on task-based socialization, not value-based socialization, which I think in ID environment, we probably think that they should do both. Not only give them consistent task assignment and guidance and feedback, but also talk about the importance of serving public. So they should do both. But so let's just leave it there. 371, it just the number of people who responded. So I do have a sampling frame for all the organization, and given that federal ministries in Nigeria are huge, so the sampling frame is quite big, but only about like 28% of the people responded to the survey, so which is comparable in terms of response rate to other surveys being done by other researchers, in particular with the public servants. It's normally tend to be low. Public servants tend to not respond much to survey. So that's how the 371 number came around.
Thank you, Dr. Hein. In fact, as you were giving your answer to Zagun's question, it kind of felt like a deja vu, because we do have a lot of discussions, and maybe several studies have even been carried out. I don't know about the literature on if you would compare attitude of workers in the private sector to attitude of workers in the civil service, where you'd see that output and delivery tends to be higher in the private sector. But I think sometimes we take it for granted that it is just because in the public service, supervision, monitoring may not be as strict as it would be in the private sector, because obviously the private is for profit. So you want to make sure that you get the maximum out of the people that you are employing or out of labor. But then I think it could also eventually relate to the fact that the socialization process, that is the assigning, guiding, correcting, is more task-based than value-based. So if you've completed your task, you don't really feel like you need to do anything again. But if you're really more bent on adding proper value, that means being more productive and getting the maximum output of your working hours, because that is how your supervisor is socializing, I mean, you into the organization. Then you become more, proactive and more productive. So I think this has a link with that. Am I wrong?
No, I think it's absolutely right. I find it. I think it's absolutely right. Yes.
And I think this is good advice for organizations on how they go ahead and work, from that hierarchy. If you're a supervisor working with new recruits, it's important that you have some of this knowledge in the background. I see Zagun has raised his hand again, and I don't see any other hand. Is there any other question besides Zagun? If not, I think that's the final question for today's seminar. Zagun, please go ahead and then.
Thank you. Please, did your findings actually come up to point that there is any mechanism for employees to raise alarm or flag on why they are not getting a tax or value training? Thank you.
Another good comment, Zagun. It's hard. And I don't find any viable mechanism. And like the negative socialization experience can vary from like you were saying earlier, Zagun, that some supervisor don't really know how to interact, how to guide, how to correct in a way that is empowering to recruits, to much more insidious behavior where they are actively discriminating against a particular recruit. And given that supervisor ultimately have power because of the hierarchy, and given that in the chain of command, everything goes through the supervisor in public service, it's extremely hard to go against them, unfortunately. So that is where, when I talk about the performance appraisal, that's what I was alluding to. Not only rewarding supervisors who are doing good in terms of socialization people properly, integrating them properly into the service, but also monitoring supervisors who are potentially, giving people a negative socialization experience for non-meritocratic reasons, for various non-meritocratic reasons, and monitoring them and giving the appropriate punishment. Because at the end of the day, this is about people investment, and like in what ways they are investing. We need to understand and appropriately tied to the performance. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hein. I think I don't see any hands up again. So I'll just give you a minute. You can summarize and give us your last words or anything, and then we are done with today's seminar. So please go ahead.
The only comment is I thought all the comments are like very thoughtful, very helpful to me personally in terms of like going forward and looking much deeper into the results. So, and I really appreciate your time giving me this opportunity to participate. My interests continue on towards in Ghana, Nigeria. So I hope one day we can collaborate together. If you have a suitable project in mind, please let me know. I'll be interested. I'm interested always in developing countries' challenges. So thank you very much.
Excellent. And I'm sure we would invite you again. I just want to say special thank you to Dr. Inusa and his students from the Department of Psychology. They are the industrial psychologists, if I'm right. They were very interested in this topic. I want to say thank you to all colleagues and to partners and people from the civil service who all joined this very, very interesting seminar. I think this has been a very good engagement. We are especially grateful to you, Dr. Hein, for honoring the Center for Social Policy seminar series with this amazing presentation. We are happy to have you again. And that's also to all colleagues who would like to present at the Center Seminar. We have it every other Thursday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. It's been an amazing afternoon. And once again, thank you all for joining us. You can always go to our website, and there you can see YouTube videos of our seminars. Thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this presentation.
Thank you and have a good day.